It was then all chiefs made an oath to stand together, united as men. And a crown was fashioned by Alaric, runesmith of the dwarfs, placed by Alaric the priest upon Sigmar's brow. Henceforth, let all men unite and appoint the greatest among them to wield the hammer. Then did Sigmar cause to be built the greatest of halls beside the Reich, the great hall of kings.
With the monumental victory of Blackfire Pass under his belt, Sigmar Heldenhammer was now renowned throughout the lands of men as perhaps the greatest hero to have ever graced the annals of the tribes. The Hammer of the Goblins, who had finally ended their destructive invasions and who had brought together the tribes of men in absolute brotherhood. Now all that remained was to be formally coronated, and as a fiercely devout worshipper of Ulrich, there was only one individual in the land who would lay upon Sigmar's brow the crown of Emperor. A warrior perhaps even greater than he, the very incarnation of the god Ulrich upon the mortal coil, the Ulrich. Before the oath stone of Reichdorf, in view of his brother kings, Sigmar knelt before the mighty war priest, showing all his reverence to the Lord of Winter. The Ulrich saw within Sigmar's soul a thirst for immortal glory, a drive to rival even the mighty deeds of his god. His lust for glory and immortality sat in equality with his devotion to Ulrich, and that his glory would be gained through battle. This, as our Ulrich knew, pleased the wolf god. As a final test of his worthiness, our Ulrich bade Sigmar submerge himself within the icy waters of the Cauldron of Woe. If he could survive the cauldron's judgment and prove his strength, then would the warrior priest bless his coronation. Sigmar descended into the waters, and despite the deathly cold nearly killing him, he emerged from it by sheer strength of will. Satisfied by the king's performance and requiring no further demonstration, our Ulrich commanded Sigmar to kneel, so that he may place the dwarven crown brought forth from Alaric's forge upon his brow, and declare him the supreme master of the empire. Sigmar's first decree was to abolish the old status of king, and introduce the station of count. In practice, this decree changed very little. It was primarily a means of reinforcing the subordination of the tribal chieftains to the emperor. But in truth, it left the powers of the individual chieftains more or less intact, insofar as their ability to govern their own respective peoples. Although the emperor, of course, retained the ability to impose himself on any of their affairs as he saw fit. No single man, Sigmar had decreed, could or should govern a domain as vast as the empire. Indeed, any man who sought to rule would do so through the aid and support of his brother kings, who also retained the power to remove the emperor, as well as his appointed heir, from power if it became obvious that the current incumbent was unworthy of command. The formal process of election did not become part of the Count's powers until after Sigmar had abdicated the throne in his 50th year of rule. Sigmar's second decree, immediately afterwards, was to declare his native Reichdorf as the capital of the new empire. The foundations of the realm were now laid, but the true test of securing it was at hand.
Most men's desires are simple and banal. Food in their belly, a home to shelter from the cold, and a woman to bear their sons. But not you, no. Sigmar the Heldenhammer is a killer whose heart only sings when death is a hair's breadth away, and his blood-stained hammer is crushing the skulls of his foes. Like all warriors, you have darkness in your heart that lusts for violence. It is what births the urge to kill and destroy in men, but yours will consume you without balance in your heart. Temper your darkness with compassion, mercy, and love. Only then will you be the emperor this land needs for it to survive. This is my warning to you, child of thunder.
Yet it was at the night of his glorious victory celebration that Sigmar spoke to the old hag witch for perhaps the last and final time. The old hag told the noble emperor of his last prophecy, of the impending doom that was to come should he not learn to control the darkness which lurks within the hearts of all men. If he failed, then all that was achieved would be in vain, and mankind would once more plunge deeply into the darkness which lurks within their very hearts. In the wars to come, the old hag asked Sigmar to ensure that the warrior eternal must live, lest his death shall spell the beginning of the end. With her prophecy given, Sigmar collapsed onto his bed, sleep dragging him down into its warm embrace. When the Emperor next awoke, Sigmar made ready to ensure that his empire would be secured from the evil which would come upon his realm. His first act was to go into the kingdom of the Endels and reassure the loyalty of Count Uldred, son of the late King Marbad, who sacrificed his life to save Sigmar during the battle at the Blackfire Pass. From there, Sigmar valiantly slew the marsh demons which inhabited the outskirts of the city, freeing the Endels from the curse of pestilence and reassuring the loyalty of Count Uldred to Sigmar's cause. With the Endels' loyalty finally secured, Sigmar launched an invasion of the Teutones tribe which lasted for 2 years. This culminated with a siege of Teutonstrik, which ended with an imperial victory over the Teutones. Marius, left with no other recourse, pledged his sword oath to Sigmar. The Emperor left a force comprised of differing tribes comprised of those who had not yet been involved in taking the city, as Sigmar feared the warriors would exact vengeance upon the city for the men lost in the siege, and tax the city of Teutonstrik heavy for a period, partitioning off the income to the imperial army as a reward.
Thus did Sigmar call to account those who turned their backs. And great was the war waged on a king that lived by the blood of heroes. Mighty was Sigmar's wrath, yet guarded not was his weary soul, and evil of ancient times found root in the present.
After dealing with the Teutones and siphoning off 1/10 of the city's riches towards those warriors who partook in the siege, Emperor Sigmar was moved to take account of a dreaded evil stalking the shadows of Middenheim. There, Sigmar was presented with the horrors of a necromancer that had taken residence within the Middle Mountains, on an old fortress known only as the Brass Keep. Knowing that such evil could not stand to live within his empire, Sigmar led a war host towards the mountains, bearing the dragon banner of the Unborogen, a symbol which dictated that no mercy or quarter would be given to the enemies of the empire. The army continued on its way, marching higher into the soaring peaks, winding a treacherous course through icy valleys and mist-shrouded gorges as they climbed high above the snowline. Sigmar chose their course without truly understanding what guided him, for this region of the north was little mapped, and few had travelled this way and lived to tell of it. It felt as though the coldest wind in the world blew from the heart of the mountains, and Sigmar was merely following it, like an explorer tracing the course of a river back to its source. At each fork in the landscape, Sigmar would strike out without hesitation, leading his army deeper and deeper into the unknown. Scouts reported signs of greenskins and other dangerous monsters dogging their course, but no one dared attack so numerous a body of warriors. Finally, the army reached the frozen valley which held the Brass Keep. As the army walked through the frozen lake which filled the valley floor, Sigmar and his entire host saw beneath the thick sheet of ice a massive derelict city of towering spires and abandoned temples. Yet for all its glory, it was a dead place, a mockery of a city where lives were lived and dramas, both vital and banal, were played out on a daily basis. It was the city of Morcaine, and it stood as a grim reminder to the necromancer of his former home before it fell many thousands of years ago. A cold gust of wind blew through the army as the necromancer appeared atop a bone-white tower behind the walls of the Brass Keep. The war host of Emperor Sigmar charged through the frozen lake as the gates to the Brass Keep came wide open. In their path stood a whole army of undead monstrosities conjured by the foul sorcery of the necromancer. Yet despite this, Sigmar, with his golden hammer shining with light, illuminated the army's path towards the citadel. As the magics of the keep dissipated, it revealed the Brass Keep to be nothing more than a derelict husk of its former glories. Only the tower remained as it was, and it was there that Sigmar fought the necromancer, known in ancient times as Morath of Morcaine, and hurled him down from the tower. Yet as he basked in his triumph, a golden shine reflected itself from a magnificent crown which the necromancer had once worn. Picking it up from the ground, golden light flowed from the crown and into Sigmar, healing him of his burdens and pain. Believing the crown to be powerful and benevolent, Sigmar forsook the crown made by Alaric and took this one as his new badge of authority, never truly understanding the evil which sat beneath its sundered core.